I'm just so glad to be alive. I'm so glad to be alive. You see my elbow? Can you see this is my little wound. This is my little wound right here, man. I got some big wounds on my knee. You don't need to see my legs. Taking my girls to music class. It's just walking distance from our house. And we're goofing around. Dude, you're 57. Shouldn't be goofing around, playing tag or something. And I fell, man. I wiped out on the sidewalk. And, I mean, my Seiko Coral Monster was untouched, which is a miracle, but I was all bloody all over the knee. I thought the neighbors were going to call an ambulance, which would have been an injury to my man pride. But you know what? That was a good wake-up call. Stop goofing around. You're too old. You can't afford to get injured. I was so lucky I was able to work out today. What are you wearing, McMahon? You are a watch addict. Just tell people what you're wearing. This is a Seiko SBDC 051. Yes, you love it. You love the dome sapphire. And you know what? I would tell you, these are about 700 bucks, maybe a little more. The 42mm Grand Seikos that I like are about 5K. This has Zaratsu polish on it, sapphire. Not a bad, reasonable alternative to a Grand Seiko, frankly. At least that's what I tell myself in my head, so I don't go crazy. Speaking of craziness, I actually like the green and the blue variants. The 077 and 053. But wouldn't that be overkill if I had a black, a blue, and a green? Overkill. McMahon, your middle name should be Overkill. So speaking of overkill, here's what I want to talk about today. I have a link on today's post to a short story I wrote about the time of history we're living in. And what's the short story called? It's called Couples Therapy in the Age of Performance Wokeness. Now, I am not a political ideologue, and when I listen to podcasts, I like to listen to those who are independent thinkers who aren't political ideologues. I like to listen to Joe Rogan. He had a really good podcast with Eric Weinstein the other day. I like Sam Harris, and then I listen to a lot of independent thinkers such as Charlie Sykes, David Frum, Rick Wilson, Bill Kristol. I think they're pretty independent thinkers. That they don't drink any kind of Kool-Aid, and so I'm an independent thinker. But you know, I think in the age of social media, we're performing. I heard Charlie Sykes say something called performance wokeness, and what happens is, when you have an idea that you want to argue for, you're really just performing in front of the already converted on social media, and as a result, we're not listening to one another anymore. And I do agree with those who say we're living in a cold civil war. And I see it. I see it up close. I see it with my students whose parents, they tell me, are going through divorce because of opposing political camps. And so I wrote a short story about a couple who are on the different political aisles. You know, one supports the current administration. He is a United States Marine. He is a Mexican American, and he likes traditional images of masculinity. He likes pro-military, pro-law enforcement, low taxes. That's what he stands for. And I know this guy personally. I mean, I wrote a fictionalized version of him, and he likes me even though he knows I'm skeptical of the current administration, because he knows I'm not an ideologue. He knows I have a sense of humor. I'll laugh with him, and I talk to him about stuff, and I challenge him, but I do it in a way that I don't dehumanize him. And so I wrote this story. I wanted to show the humanity of this guy and his wife. I created a fictionalized wife of a woman, a professor of history, a liberal Mexican-American woman who, you know, listens to NPR, does yoga. But I wanted to make both of these people human in this story, and I wanted to make the couple's therapist watching them fight. And as the therapist is watching this couple fight, she realizes this isn't just a couple fighting, this is America fighting. America is fighting like this I think in the age of social media, we're not listening to one another. And I think that because of my job as an instructor, I have to listen to different voices. And I wanted to use this Mexican-American couple because we have a certain stereotype about how a Mexican-American would vote. A Mexican-American would vote, you know, in a very liberal way, some people would think. And I wanted to show that that is not always the case. I actually have two Mexican-American students who are very pro this current administration. And they like me, even though they know I'm skeptical of the current administration. In fact, they like me so much they take all of my classes. And here's the thing about being an instructor. Now, I teach writing. I always tell my students, and I've always told my students this, I don't care what your political beliefs are, it doesn't matter what mine are, it's unethical of me to tell you what to believe in or how to believe, and that somehow your grade is dependent on your just regurgitating my beliefs, which to me is not even teaching, you're just massaging my ego. And my students always appreciate that I say that, and they always tell me, you know, there's some other professor who always does that to you. They make you drink their Kool-Aid or you don't get a good grade. And because I've never gone down that road, students appreciate that. The only thing I tell my students, please don't write an essay in which you say you kicked a dog. Because I don't like cruelty toward animals. In 1990, I had a 300-pound football player who wrote an essay about how he kicked a dog at a party, and I said, you got to rewrite it. I can't grade this. This doesn't work for me. So I do have my boundaries, but so I wrote a story to capture today's historical moment we're in. We are in a cold civil war. I don't tell people what to believe because I know from experience there's this thing called the backfire effect. All you do is anger people. People need to come to their own conclusions on their own. I'll give you an example, then I'll get out of here. When I grew up, everyone told me I had to worship Bob Dylan. And I didn't know if Bob Dylan was good or bad or whatever. I was just so turned off by people in the 70s telling me I had to drink the Bob Dylan Kool-Aid. I just could not. I pushed Bob Dylan away for decades. Now recently I saw Bob Dylan in a Martin Scorsese documentary on Netflix, and I was totally in love with what I was watching. This guy's a genius. This dude is legit. But the thing is, I had to experience it on my own without people pushing it on me. So, I feel that way about politics too, or religion, or anything. You need to come to conclusions on your own. You can't have people pushing you. It doesn't work that way. It's not human psychology. So I wrote a story about that, and it's called Couples Therapy in the Age of Political Wokeness. I got that term, political wokeness, from Charlie Sykes. He is a political thinking writer person that I like quite a bit. He has a Bulwark podcast that's probably my favorite podcast. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I have a link to this short story, and it costs 99 cents, which is cheaper than a Rolex. I will give you that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, I'm out.